Hi, welcome. So what is the most important responsibility for a leader?
Well, it's got to be planning for the future.
That's right. It's on succession planning, and that's what today's topic is going to be about. Welcome to the February edition of Talent Matters. I'm John Gabe, and this is Cindy Gabe, and we are going to talk about the very important responsibility that a leader has in planning for the future.
And a lot of people put this off forever because it feels like such a daunting exercise, but it really doesn't have to be that hard. Now, for this session, you have to remember some housekeeping rules. We're going to be around 30 to 40 minutes, depends on how excited we get about some of the slides. It's also going to assure that you get the slides and any resources within a day or so of this webcast airing. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please put them in the chat. We will be monitoring this live and answering those as we go along. It's also important if you enjoy these and you want questions for any future webcasts, when you see the webcast sign up go out, you can text your email in question in there, and we'll be happy to include it in the webcast like we have for the last one or two.
Right. So let's get into it and understand this a little bit deeper and why this is important. My favorite Ben Franklin quote is, "Failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." And the whole idea here is succession needs to be something that's proactive. It's putting that plan together, getting the plan for those key members who might be moving on, or yourself who might be moving on. So it's all about preparation.
Yeah, and it's funny when there's always been a joke about when should you start planning for succession, and the answer was yesterday. But it is something that when you have plans, rarely in business do things go exactly according to plan. But if you have a plan and something takes you a little off course, you still know how to get back on course and you can flex around that. If you don't have any plan, you kind of are the flea on the tail of the dog that's getting wagged all over the place, and you're not really having anything in your control. So this is about some of the things that keep leaders and business owners up at night and cause the biggest angst, and having a plan so you can sleep a little bit better.
So we've all heard the organizations who say our greatest asset is our people.
Yeah.
And you may have insurance on all your other assets, but what are you doing to protect your people asset?
That's right.
And succession plan is probably the most important protection you can have. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about succession today, we're going to break it into three different types of succession, and then talk a little bit about what we mean about succession. But we're going to talk a little bit about the moving on of the founder, the top dog, what happens when they're ready to succeed. What happens when you have that key leader, the person who's been around forever, who you couldn't live without, who suddenly decides they're going to move on or
they're
hit the lotto,
retire or just decide enough is enough.
Right. And then the other one that stings is you have that superstar, that person who you can kind of see running your company someday, who you're starting to groom, and suddenly they move on. What's your plan for that? Yeah. So we're going to talk about all three types of succession. There's a little bit of different planning that goes into play for each of the three, and we're going to dig into what works and what doesn't work for all those areas.
One of the things that is really important is when you think about it, after this webcast, you're going to have haunting moments. What are those positions that really come back and haunt you? That's oftentimes where you should start, because one of the things that makes succession planning feel so overwhelming is, oh my gosh, we were talking to one client yesterday, 70 different titles, which means they have about 300 employees. And if they were going to figure out a succession plan for all of them, that's insane. So where do you start? And think about the ones that really keep you up at night or give you a little bit of that indigestion.
Sure. So a little bit about us. The Menace Group has been around. We're coming up on 30 years.
Next month.
Yes, exactly.
Join us for our 30th anniversary session.
We've been around. We've got a location in Charlotte, North Carolina, as well as in Detroit. Team members spread out throughout the country. Our area focuses on hiring, bringing people into an organization and developing them, getting them in the right seat, and making sure that they're productive.
Yeah, and so when we first started this, I founded it in Metro Detroit. as John said, about 30 years ago. And then it was only 10 years later we decided to expand outside of Detroit and commuted back and forth for 20 years, which is a little insane. But it allowed us to serve clients all over the country in just about every industry. The reality is people are people. And it doesn't matter what your company does. If you have people in your company, some of those issues are the hardest of all. There's two things that keep business owners up at night. It's cash flow and talent. And usually if you get the talent right, it's easier to get the cash flow right.
And we have a leadership academy that hits on a variety of leadership areas, all of which come into play when you're talking about succession planning. And you'll use different types of approaches depending on who you are preparing the plan for. And there's a variety of services that leaders should take advantage of as they're putting their plans together.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that we want to start off with is what is succession planning? You hear that term thrown about. Attorneys use it when they're talking about the succession of an organization. Bankers use it when they're talking about how things are getting set up. HR people use it in a variety of ways. For us, succession planning means putting a plan together for those key roles and what are you going to do when that person leaves, either on their own or for whatever reason. It's the planning of the individual that needs to be put in place.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's to prevent business disruption, internally or externally. Because every person in your organization, inevitably, even if they just come in to make the donuts, do certain things that if they were not there to do them tomorrow, it would be disruptive to the organization. So what's the plan other than having somebody else fill in who has no clue how to make those same donuts? So it's a way of putting a plan together so nobody has to panic, that your clients and the rest of your team don't experience any disruption, and to have a way to flex, even if the plan doesn't come off perfectly, but at least you've given some forethought as to what are those key activities that they do and how do they do them, not just list out, oh, well, it's important to get payroll out. Well, how do we get payroll out, right? There's so many things that we can do, and you think of the top 3 to 5 even that each person does, and not 3 to 5 categories, but 3 to 5 real key things that if they weren't there to do them tomorrow, or even just for a week or two if they were thrown into the hospital, what would happen to the organization? And there really needs to be a plan for everybody.
Yeah, and the plan will vary depending on the role and who you are creating the plan for. One of my favorite stories around this is back in the 70s and 80s when Jack Welch was running General Electric. And at the time,
not that any of us remember that.
At the time, well, I've read this. At the time, Jack Welch and General Electric was known primarily as the place to go to be groomed as a leader. Sure, they had all their other successful divisions, and when you combined them together, General Electric was one of, if not the largest company in the world. But what they're most known for were developing leaders. And they had a rule that if one of their key leaders were to move on for whatever reason, they had to have that role filled internally within 3 days, certainly within 1 week. But they were so adamant.
They had to begin executing on the plan within 3 days.
Every key role in their complex organization had to have a successor identified. So when that opening occurred, they knew exactly what they're going to do. And what that did is it minimized the disruption of the business.
Mm-hmm. Well, and think about it. If you're trying to do most of the promoting from within, and you say, okay, well, if Tony leaves, John's our successor for there. Great. Who's filling John's role? And because he can't do 2 full-time jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And then if he moves up, so there really needs to be a plan, a cascaded plan. Now, exhale, we understand this is one of those elephants you have to take a bite one at a time to get through. But you have to start with where do we want to be and start with some of those key roles that you know would be most disruptive. CEOs are big ones. Also, people who have been with you forever.
Yeah, we'll talk about all those separately. But mm-hmm. the General Electric had the luxury of having a bench that they can groom for internally.
Thousands and thousands.
Not all succession is going to come from bringing somebody in internally, and that's going to be part of the plan. Right. When you do have that key opening, are you going to tap the next guy on the shoulder, or are you going to go out and you're going to recruit for it,
or a little mix of both,
or both? Right. Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite quotes is, if you're not losing sleep over a key employee, should you be? You need to ask yourself, as you're going down your roster of key players on your organization, what are you going to do if they hit the lotto and they're going to be gone tomorrow? What are you going to do to replace them? And if that doesn't send, if you've got a plan in place to do that, that's great. But most leaders we talk to, they don't even want to play that.
They want to
that
pretend
game.
it's never going to happen, especially with superstars.
Yes, and you have to assume that that opening is going to come without any warning. And we'd like to play the game where what happens if you hit the lotto and suddenly you don't need to work and that person leaves. Other organizations like to play the thought leadership game of what happens if somebody got hit by a bus and that opening is occur. But you should ask yourself, what would you do for each one of your key players if they weren't able to show up for work tomorrow?
And I even like to think of it, and this came hard and fast. We've dealt with the succession forever, but when COVID hit, and you had people who were hospitalized for weeks and months at a time, and they went from being perfectly fine one day to not. And so if all of a sudden you had people in the hospital for a few weeks with pneumonia and then a few weeks more than that recovering, this is not like they can just work remotely. They're out. They're out for the count. And so what are you going to do to sustain your business while this person recovers, even if they're going to be back in a couple months?
And we've talked to a lot of private equity organizations who, as they're evaluating firms to acquire and bring in, when they get to the talent piece, one of the things that they want to understand is, what is the succession plan? Yeah, they're going to buy this group of talent, but if that talent leaves, what are they going to do? What is the plan? The organization is more valuable to the private equity firm if there is a plan in place for all their key players.
And one of the biggest reasons for that is when an organization is considering a merger or an acquisition, it is the key executives at the top who are most likely to leave because they can, and they are most impacted by new ownership. So they'd rather leave while they can have a choice of where they're going rather than waiting to be replaced. And so as soon as there are rumors about an organization considering these things, you can have your top executives looking for new spaces to go. And so the PE firms or any acquiring organization wants to know what the succession plan is, because if I think I'm buying this executive team and 2 or 3 of them bail, all of a sudden, what am I buying?
Right. So all the more. So we talked about the 3 different areas of focus, the founder, a key leader, and an emerging leader. We're talking a little bit about the founder. And we're hearing more and more CEO founders in this AI world who are burning out and not ready to take on this battle and are looking to move on. And that's fine. But what the CEO needs to do is make sure that they've positioned the company to move forward without them. And there are lots of different things that they can do to make that happen. But now we're seeing more founders than ever giving up, not necessarily giving up, but too tired to fight the battle.
Exiting, yeah. So there's different reasons. I mean, some of them are leaving because it's exhausting, whether it was COVID or the economic uncertainties or some of the global affairs that are going on. They're just exhausted, and this isn't fun anymore. And they're like, yeah, I'm out. This just isn't it. Others are like the idea of learning AI at a senior point. If you've had your business for 30, 40, 50 years, or it's been in the family for a couple of generations, having to learn AI and really leverage that in your organization, not just using it as a search engine, as we talked about last month, those types of things can be quite overwhelming for founders. Mm-hmm. And that's another good reason. And then adapting to the new people challenges, with the unemployment rate being as phenomenally low as it has been for so many years now, and us not producing enough humans, so it means it's not going away. The people challenges can be some of the most exhausting to CEOs. And so they're looking for alternatives, whether it's moving on to the chairman of the board status or some of those other things. And they really are just tired and looking for someone else to take over the day-to-day activities.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many CEOs we talk to who are complaining about this Gen Z and all the challenges they bring. I'm telling you, it has nothing to do with the Gen Z. It's just that level of the workforce now. But it's
They're
those
the
types of
newest ones
challenges
coming into the
that
workforce.
are forcing a lot of these CEOs to look at what they need to do to move on.
Yeah, the previous generations complained about these CEOs when they were the youngest
Yeah.
in the workforce too.
So some of the things, and we've worked with hundreds of CEOs who've moved on and succeeded their business onto others. And some of the things that we've found that you want to avoid if you're that founder, and one of them is just assuming that there's a family member that is going to be able to come in and take over. I think we read a stat once that it's like a huge percentage of the businesses that are passed on to Gen 2 fail. Gen 3, not so much.
Gen 3 has to pull them up out of the ashes like a phoenix.
The chances of a Gen 2 failure are like almost 50%.
Right.
So that's not a
And that's
not as
more
straightforward.
because of lack of preparedness, which goes back to what we were talking about, and just thinking you can hand it off. Well, what are the odds that any member of your family is going to have the exact same passion for what made you start the business that you did? Mm-hmm. You know, they might go along with it. They like the lifestyle. They like the idea of what they think you're making, but it isn't necessarily because they have a passion around the business. And what are the odds you've actually had the confidence to let go of some pieces to prepare your Gen 2 to really take over?
Yeah, the other one that we see that doesn't work very well is when the CEO wants to move on and they're going to go out and spend a lot of money on this hired gun, this guy who's been a proven commodity for some Fortune 500 company. They're going to overpay them, bring them in, and expect that they're going to take their company to the next level. Rarely does that work. Mm-hmm. You're not necessarily going to be able to hire your way into succession as the founder.
It's possible, but again, you need to be prepared. Mm-hmm. Just hoping it's going to work. We all know hope is not a strategy. And just because someone has rumor to have been wildly successful someplace else or in some other organization doesn't mean they can lead your organization well.
Right. And the other thing that we found that doesn't work well when a founder moves on is assuming that they can just divvy up their role to their executive team and let the executive team sort of run the company as a group versus having a leader in charge. Rarely does that work. It will fall apart if there isn't somebody who's ultimately responsible.
And I'm hearing some of that filtering down to a lot of the employee-owned businesses. Well, you know, I don't have anybody to give it to, so I'm going to turn this into an ESOP. And there isn't real planning for who is going to lead the organization, and there's misperceptions by the members of the organization as to what it means to be an employee owner. And again, it goes back to not being very well prepared, the communication being weak, and just looking for an easy out.
Right. So what works? So one of the most important moves that a founder can do is figure out what role they're going to play within the organization in the future. Rarely do these CEOs move on completely. There's generally some tie back to the organization. What we have found that worked best is taking that founder CEO and making them this chairman type role, or somebody who's not necessarily in the role day to day, and they still get to be involved a little bit in the strategy and the planning, but they're off on the golf course or on the beach or traveling around, but they still have a connection.
But it all depends on what the chairman really wants to do, or the founder really wants to do. So we have one client who said, I'm going to be at the beach. I'll show up for my quarterly strategy meetings and the 2-day annual planning session, but other than that, I'm at the beach. We have others who like to spend most of their time on the golf course, but pop into the office, but they've committed to a sandbox. So when they pop into the office, they don't create disruption. They've agreed to stay in certain lanes. And we have another client who loves to go and experiment and play mad scientist and come up with the next new cool thing that they can introduce into the organization. So they have 60-70% of their time that they're just playing with things that could really launch to the next level. and coming in for those strategy meetings.
Yeah, they sort of put on their visionary hat at that stage of their career and turn the running of the organization over to a CEO or an integrator or whatever it might be. The key is, if you are going to take that route and you are going to take the founder and sort of remove them and put them in that chairman's role, get very clear on what the expectation is and what their sandbox is going to be, as well as the person who's going to be running the company. You don't want that founder, that chairman, to become swooping in and then swoop back out and disrupt what the organization is going through. Because then what you're going to have is you're going to have a distant founder and you're going to have a COO who's going to quit, and then you got an organization.
It also is good to make sure both sandboxes are crystal clear, because in the absence of that, the founder doesn't know when or how to let go. And they could micromanage the heck out of the new person coming in. Additionally, including the executive team, the people who've been who only know what it's like to report to the founder, realizing they're going to have a new person to report to, having their buy-in on what the founder is going to be doing and what the new person is going to be doing, because the head trash they have around, I don't need somebody micromanaging me. Why are they bringing somebody in to do this stuff, as opposed to this person's going to help us leverage the AI. They're going to remove obstacles, deploy resources. They're not going to be micromanaging us, and they're going to be kind of a buffer. But in the absence of that, the executive team may still do end arounds around the new CEO to go back to the founder, because they don't understand what else the founder is supposed to be doing. And that clarity is critical for everybody in the organization.
Yeah, this is a very common, popular succession plan for founders. It isn't necessarily a sale. It isn't turning it over to a family member. It isn't an ESOP turning it over to an employees. It's basically removing themselves to be more distant in sort of, we'd like to think of it as a chairman's role, and let the president, CEO come in, whether that's through a hire or a promotion, but that the chairman still feels they're connected to their baby. They still feel like they're a part of it, but they don't have any of the headaches that burned them out at the beginning.
Right. Well, the key leader. So let's say you've got an executive team, you've got all worked together for a long, long time, and one of the senior executives, at least one of them, should be getting ready to retire. And you realize this, or they're just exhausted as well, and they don't seem to be putting in quite the effort that they used to. What are you going to do? And preparing for their replacement without saying, so John, when you're gone, who should take over? Because that sounds a lot like, I better start packing my bags. But there is some planning that needs to take place. The biggest challenge people have is if they know John is retiring, and this is especially true if the individual has been there for a significant amount of time.
They're wearing a lot of different hats.
Yeah, so they come in, and you might have been hired as CFO. And we saw this happen. This one CFO also became the talent champion. For real, not just saddled with HR, but was really passionate about all the right people in the right seats and getting extraordinary performance out of it, and was fully invested in that. So he owned that too. And then while he was, he was responsible for IT. And then he was in the central time zone, but they had him managing a plant in Europe. Which, what? Right? And so he had all this stuff. Nobody in their right mind was going to come in from the outside and take all of that on. And if we said, we got to find John 2.0, we got to find somebody who's going to do all this stuff. And first of all, if you keep referring to it as we need to replace John, or we need to find John 2.0, the next person you hire, the first thing everybody's going to say is, he's not John, right? So, but if you phrase it differently and say, when John's not here, what's the work that needs to be done in the future? This doesn't take away from all the stuff that John has done for us, but maybe we could use some new stuff that John wasn't going to do, like some of the AI stuff or whatever. And so you need to look at, what is that CFO role going to look like in the future? And do we now need a head of talent and culture? Do we now need a different person to take over the plant in Europe? So it's a completely different perspective, and it's almost a horrible habit to make, to say, when John's not here, who's going to be our next John? And you need to really look at what's the work that has to be done.
Yeah, it is this role that I think causes CEOs the most sleepless nights, wondering what they're going to do if that key person who's been with them forever, who knows everything more about their operation than the CEO does, what are they going to do if this person hits the lottery or has a health event and isn't able to show up to work tomorrow for an extended period of time? These are the roles that the succession plan is most important for, particularly if you're looking at a sale or some sort of partnership.
I think of one role, actually, it's somebody who signed up for this webcast, who does so many things in this organization. Her title is Chief Knowledge Officer because she knows everything, right? So she started off as the head of IT. They put her in charge of HR. And I remember her saying, I don't know anything about HR, but she was passionate about the quality of their talent. And she knew how to access external experts, whether it was us or insurance people or payroll people or whatever, to bring everybody together that needed to. And because she understood the organization and operationally how it ran in IT, she had more street creds than anybody else in the organization when she was putting some of these processes in place. And so I understand the CEO and she have made a pact that they're going to retire together because neither of them wants to be there when the other one's not. Imagine the succession of those two positions together.
That one of the challenges you have in building out the plan for this key role is this leader isn't always going to be receptive to helping you put that plan together. They're thinking, I'm going to be here forever, or
just wait till I leave. Don't be forcing me out the door.
Right. So it's not uncommon when you're putting the succession plan together for a key person that person may not be receptive to the plan.
Right. And so it's really important to say, look, this is no rush, but we don't want to be the holdup when you really want to try to move into another role. And it could take us a year or two to get through the transition, right? And to find the right person and make sure that everything's transitioned smoothly. We had one client in Manhattan who realized that the one person, I think he was COO, came in and said, I'm retiring. I'm retiring in June. And this was like December. And they said, we're not ready for that. So they called us in. We went through the process with them. We helped them find somebody. And a month before the new person came on board, the person who was supposed to retire passed away suddenly. And so they had a plan in place, fortunately, but it can be a little unnerving, but it's really important to get the buy-in of that person. And when they realize we're not trying to take away from anything you've done in the past, but we need to be prepared so that when you're ready to leave, we're not the holdup.
Right. So the third area that we want to talk about when it comes to succession planning are this emerging future superstar. This is the person who you look at and you think, this is who's going to be running my company someday. And this is the person who I'm going to nurture and I'm going to bring them along. This is what I looked like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can see this person running our company and being groomed for that. The question is, what are you doing to protect yourself when that person leaves?
Yeah, sometimes you're the only person who knows that, and it's the best kept secret, and nobody's helping this person understand what you see for them in the future. And, everybody blames this on the newest generation, but we went through it. When we were in our 20s, we felt like, I still remember being in my late 20s, going into my boss saying, I think I'm ready to lead. I'm ready to have this person, that person report to me. And they said, you haven't paid your dues yet, right? And so, but there was no plan. If you see this person being a superstar and say, we see you being here in 20 years, well, what do the next 2 years look like? What does the next 5 years look like? The next 10, lay out a plan. But this means we need your commitment to develop some more of these leadership skills. We need you to develop a little more patience with some of the less than bright people you have to work with. We need you but if they feel like they're being invested and there's a plan for them and we're all working the plan, the odds of keeping them are much greater. But one of the primary reasons superstars get frustrated with their boss, which is the number one reason they leave, is that they don't feel challenged, they don't feel like there's an opportunity to grow, and they see no future for themselves.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with letting that future superstar know that there's a potential that they could be running the company someday. And the other challenge you run into when you see that talent is you give them a lot more responsibility. You give them those extra jobs. You give them those extra projects. And if they leave, that puts you in that much greater of a bind unless you've got a plan for how you're going to parse all that out after.
And you guys have seen our job scorecards in the past. We don't have to rehash all of that. But when somebody is in role A and they're like, well, how come you're not promoting me? Like, it's been 6 months, man. I'm ready for my next job. And you say, okay, well, which jobs do you think you're ready for next? And you can pull out the 1 or 2 job scorecards that they might consider as their next one. And then say, now look at the success factors. Do you really think you're ready to do that now? Oh, all right. So what can we do to prepare you so when we put you in that next role, we're not setting you up for failure? Well, I really need to feel like I can do this better. I need to learn how to delegate, or I need to learn something like that. And then you can put a leadership development plan together that prepares them, because the last thing you want to do is take a superstar and throw them in a role before they're ready and set them up for failure.
Now, the good news in today's market, these superstars aren't leaving the way they used to 3 or 4 years ago. They are sticking with organizations a little bit longer. They are investing in themselves because they see their commitment to the organization being much longer term than they did 3 or 4 years ago. So we're not seeing quite the superstar churn that we did a while back, which is good for an organization. They can feel a little bit more comfortable investing in these future leaders.
Yeah, but when we talk about they're seeing longer term, we're not talking like our parents who saw a lifetime with an organization. That may not be the case. But there is some of that. And part of that is what they learned over the last 4 to 5 years. Remember, the Great Resignation turned into the Great Regret because they were jumping ship for more money and realizing the culture was not it. And they would have to keep jumping if they really wanted to find something where they were comfortable.
Yeah, and the loss of these superstars aren't quite as painful as the loss of the key leader, because you have more time to recover, and they haven't built up quite the creds as that. But you still need a plan in place for that young whippersnapper who you are delegating and who's cranking out a lot of work. And if they don't show up tomorrow, what are you going to do? So we'd like to hear what your thoughts are about succession. What's your plan? What have you done in the past to prepare yourself, either at the leadership or the founder level, a senior leadership level, or a superstar? Drop them into the feedback form. If you fill out the form, let us know what you thought about the session, and you'll get our job scorecard as a complimentary resource.
And feel free in the feedback form to tell us about things that you might want to hear in the next session. And when you see the topics, if it's a question related to one of those topics, we'll try to weave that into our talking points. And
just questions that we've gotten so far. If you have any other questions right now, is a good time to drop them into the chat. But a couple of questions that we got earlier. One is, I have a small company. I'm not exactly sure where to start with my succession plan. What do you recommend?
Yeah, we've seen this happen, well, even in our own organization. So one of the things we, of course, rely on is the job scorecard, which will break the job into 3 to 5 categories. And what's helpful is to look at those categories and say, okay, well, if Tennille's not here and she does these 5 categories, can somebody else pick some of the stuff up? And you might see Sarah could pick up these 2 and Donna could pick up the 3rd, but the other 2 we're going to have to outsource the other 2 pieces. So you can at least have a plan. And this might be a short-term plan until you hire the next Tennille, which of course you won't do because you're looking at the job that needs to be done. But people can sprint short distances. They can't sprint a marathon. So if somebody already has a full-time job and you're adding 2 categories of somebody else's job to that, you can't do that long-term. You can do it short-term. But if you break it up into pieces, then you can look at whether you have external or internal options. And as your company continues to grow, external resources and outsourcing and nearshoring seem to be some reasonable options.
Yeah, one of the things that we like to have leaders do is just take the roster of employees and just start and ask yourself, what would I do if this employee was gone tomorrow? And many leaders, it's real easy. I'll just promote Billy. Then move on to the next name? What would I do if this person left? What would I do with it? And if you go through that, you'll find out the most painful departures, and that's where you want to start first with your succession plan. Put a plan in there for the most at-risk departures first.
But even if you're in a medium or larger size company, having you do that for your direct reports, asking for the executives to do that for their direct reports.
That's essentially what General Electric does.
Yeah. Right? What are the key things that if they weren't here tomorrow would still have to get done? And that's where you know where you have the biggest exposure.
The next question we have is, so you have this plan in place. How often do you update it, or what do you do to keep it fresh?
That's a really good question. As you know, we're big advocates of quarterly performance reviews and reviews using the job scorecard, which we convert into the Performance Acceleration Tracker, the PAT. And when we go through the PAT with someone, we're talking about what have you done to develop yourself? What did you accomplish this quarter? What did you accomplish next quarter? As well as all the things on there. And what it should help us understand is when there are major shifts in the business, because you're updating the accountabilities and the success factors. And so at least every quarter, you can see if there are significant things that are changing. And then you can ask questions before it becomes a massive undertaking to say, all right, let's make sure we videotape or record or document somehow how you're doing this new whatever. So that if you're gone, somebody else can pick up where you left off. And so it's really an ongoing thing. And if you do it if you just pick out little tiny things that need to be updated as you're doing this quarterly, but certainly on an annual basis.
Yeah, I would recommend, if you've got a plan in place for key employees, to make sure you revisit that plan annually. And just ask yourself, what am I going to do if Susie leaves? And if your plan still covers all of the different areas that Susie is contributing on, then you're covered. If there are things that Susie has taken on that now need to be added into the plan, or whatever adjustments you might need to make, you definitely want to review that at least annually. And again, this is a risk avoidance approach here. It isn't so much just checking the box. You want to have that insurance policy in place.
But as an example of doing things little by little and not just waiting to the end of the year, and you guys have all heard it was our most extraordinary office manager. And in the course of 1 year, we moved states from where our headquarters were, which meant we changed banks, which meant all of the banking stuff, access codes, everything else needed to be changed. We changed CRMs, we changed our marketing, everything. And so in the course of like 3 months, so much of Ann's job changed. If we weren't documenting how to get those things done and something happened, if we waited to the end of the year, it could have been catastrophe.
Yeah. So drop your questions in. We'll get to them. Couple of points on what's coming up. March, we're talking about the accountability.
Nobody cares about accountability.
That's right. And then one of the more popular topics is hiring for core values. That's
my favorite.
Coming up in April. By the way, if you haven't seen the blog that's out there that we've written on, or the video that's out there on hiring for core values, it's phenomenal. It's getting like 100 views a week today.
Maybe we should add that in the resources.
Right. So May's got leadership alignment and how that ties into the vision of the organization. EQ is up in June. And July's been decided, but I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head. You can sign up with this QR code for any one of those sessions now. Drop your questions into the form as you fill it out so that we can address them during the webcast.
And that's it for February 2026. We will see you in March.
Yeah, you'll be getting the slides, if not this afternoon, certainly by tomorrow morning. And a recording of the session will be available as well. And then other resources that are tied to succession planning will be made available on that resource page as well.
Have a great month.
See you next week or next month.